Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, an article by Chris Quintana of USA Today. Amid coronavirus layoffs, high school seniors are too uncertain to commit to a college. Our book chapter is, what is the FSEOG? Our question from a listener, if I'm a junior, when should I start working on my personal statement? Our interview is part 3 with Vincent Garcia, understanding the 23 colleges of the California State University system. And because Vince will be talking about a specific college, we will not be having a college spotlight for this week.
Okay, friends, only have a few announcements today. So I want to clarify the gap year. Dave, why don't you want to talk about this? We received a letter this week, and David, I know that there's a little misunderstanding about the gap year when we've talked about it. You want to shed light on that, Dave?
Yes, we've talked quite a bit about students taking a gap year off, but the big condition that we have already stated in the past is that we are presuming that the students involved have already gotten accepted into the college of their choice. So therefore, instead of immediately matriculating after their acceptance, they are then requesting a gap year or arranging a gap year with the school. So there's not an issue of them never having applied to college during their senior year. And Mark, I believe that you have actually done in-depth analysis of why that's not a good idea, why it's not a good idea to not apply to college in your senior year and how difficult it can be applying to a college while you are still in a gap year. Do you want to elucidate on that?
Yeah. So a listener sent that question in, and this is almost a year ago. And actually, I can put a link to the show notes if anybody wants to go back and hear that, because I know it's hard to find it sometimes an exact episode when you're looking for something. And the listener wanted to know, thinking about taking a gap year so I can increase my college options. Right. And I mentioned a number of reasons why that's not good. And I'm not going to recite them all right now, but we had a letter come in this week indicating that there was a misinterpretation that when we were talking about a gap year, we were advocating dropping the college process completely right now, doing this gap year, and then applying out. And that is not what we're talking about.
Correct.
Very non-traditional gap. Typically with the gap year, you will secure your place in a school with a deposit, with a commitment, similar to like an early decision type commitment. In exchange for you committing to go, as long as you do something that's enriching, then some colleges will approve. Now, I will say this, there is a range of options out there. I was on with a college that said, no, we don't do gap years and we're not doing them. Another college I'm in conversations with said we need to know by May 15th. Another college, one of my clients got in writing that we will extend a gap year to all students. Another one said this will require the dean's approval. Many other ones are setting caps on them. And I don't want to get too much off into a gap year, but every school's got different policies on this. So other thing to keep in mind, we keep using the term gap year. There's also something called the gap semester as well, which is very common. Now, we're not saying everybody should do this, but we just want people to know what their options are.
And I do want to make this distinction because you've pointed out to me before, there is some significant differences between high school seniors requesting a gap year and people who are already in college, such as sophomores, freshmen, and juniors requesting a gap year in terms of their ease and how the university views them. Do you want to expand on that point?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Something I've talked with Dave a lot about. I've told him, Dave, you actually have more time. You've got a daughter who's returning as a sophomore. Current students can decide to take a year off and not lose their space. That is, you still want to check each school's individual policy, but that's something that is almost always approved. That's very different because the school sees you as committed to them. That's very different than someone who has not matriculated at all in terms of the having less hurdles to get it approved. It should really be no issue for I've never had an issue with a student who was a current student who needed to take a year off for many reasons.
Right.
And the health of a loved one.
Right.
Then they want to spend time with an aging aunt they were close to, is having some health issues. All these things are routinely approved. So that's an important distinction as well. For our admissions tip, I have a little bit of a regret here, friends. I really wish that I would have done a much more in-depth guidance on how to appeal aid awards. I know I did a 4-part interview with Mark Kantrowitz on this, but I know not everybody hears every interview, and there's so much information it's hard to process. But I tell you, like, my number one thing that I've been doing with people in the last couple of weeks has been walking and guiding them through how to appeal their aid award. And I realized May 1st was the day a lot of people had to commit for seniors. But I'm going to share a few tips over the next few weeks. Anyway, you said, well, why are you doing it when May 1st was National Candidate Reply Day? 400 plus schools have extended that date already. And also we have a lot of juniors and sophomores who listen. Parents of juniors and sophomores. So the admissions tip I'm going to give you is you need to know what type of appeal is your best case. And you need to stay in that lane. There's basically 4 types of appeals. There's a merit-based appeal, a need-based appeal, a competitor-based appeal, and just a general appeal. Know what your best shot at appeal is and stay in that lane. If you mix it up, you'll routinely get shot down. You try appeal on the basis of another merit offer and a school doesn't give merit money, you're dead on arrival. If you try a need-based appeal and a school doesn't give need-based money, then you're dead on arrival. So you just need to know. And then, I don't get too much in the weeds on this. So I'll be doing a whole segment in announcement time, Dave. And Anika will slap me in the face from Greensboro, North Carolina. And she'll say, your admissions tip was too long. And I'll be like, I know.
It's like the NFL draft. We're on the clock.
Yeah, we're on the clock.
We're on the clock. Okay.
I have the conscience of Anika 6 hours away from me, like in my head. And that's a good thing because it reins me in a bit.
Absolutely.
So admissions vernacular. Dave, I think you may know what this one is. I'm going to ask you this one. Grade grubber.
Oh, I know what that, like someone who's always going to the teachers. Man, I need another half point. I want 96, not 95. Hey, man, shoot me a half grade on this and that until the teacher starts getting real fed up.
Exactly. So that's the extreme grade grubber. The one that's constantly pleading with the teacher, or worse yet, the parent that goes to the teacher.
That's right.
Okay. Another version of it, more of a grade grubber light is just the student that is just motivated just to get grades. And that's what that's their driving force. And what a lot of people don't understand is they think that colleges are only looking strictly at GPA and that's it.
Right.
But particularly more selective colleges, they actually want the grades to be a reflection of your intellectual curiosity and your natural love of learning.
Yep.
And they differentiate between the grade grubber, the extreme version Dave says, one that's beckoning the teacher to change the grade, or even the person that's motivated for the sake of a high grade from an achievement standpoint and a recognition standpoint, as opposed to a natural love of learning. They differentiate that student with the person that just gets lost in the library or just gets lost in ideas and researches and studies things on their own. They make that distinction. Is this a grade grubber, or is this someone's strong academic performance a reflection of their insatiable love of learning? So that's admission vernacular. Dave, update. Yes. You are in a new hospital for the first time. Tell us where you're at and what you're seeing in the hospital these days.
I'm at Hackensack Meridian. It's one of the biggest hospitals in New Jersey. It's right across from New York City. And I did my first shift last night. It's a big hospital when they color code all the hallways. You're in the red zone, the green zone. And the worst thing is I had one of these temporary passes that didn't work on any of the automatic doors. So thank you for all those security guards out there that let me through into the emergency room and up to the elevators, because without them, I'd still be stuck in the parking lot. But it was a good experience. As I reported last week, we are definitely seeing a marked decline in the coronavirus cases. We're still not quite out of the woods yet, but it was a 70-degree day. People are anxious to lift down on these restrictions, and we are definitely seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So,
and just to once again, just to shout Dave out and commend him for his commitment level. So he lives in Chicago. For you first-time listeners, he's a traveling doctor licensed in 13 states, emergency medicine. And he actually recently got a New Jersey license because they needed him because of the COVID outbreak. So New Jersey's a new state. It was 12 states when we started on here the podcast. He's up to 13 states licensed. And he flies in from Chicago yesterday. And he calls me and he gets it off the plane. And it's like 2:30. And I'm like, Dave, what's wrong, man? You sound exhausted. He's exhausted at 2:30, but he catches a little cat nap, works a 12-hour shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and now we're recording at 8 a.m. So that is why Dave has been so successful in life. That's what you call hard work and dedication.
Well,
I just got to shout you out, Dave.
It's actually because they had a very, very nice doctor lounge. And they not only had a double, they had a triple espresso machine.
There you go.
When I was in Miami, I got really hooked on these things called Cuban coffees. It's literally where they put espresso and mix it with something really sweet like molasses and condensed milk. So you get a combination of a sugar high and a caffeine high. So I'm riding a little bit of the energy drink of choice there. So.
Yeah, because you sound better now than you did when you got off the airport at 2:30 from Chicago, that flight, man.
Well, a shout out to those triple espresso machines. I was doing a little double and triple dipping last night. So thank you.
All right, Dave, talk to us about our article.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right. The article, Chris Quintana, USA Today. Amid coronavirus layoffs, high school seniors are too uncertain to commit to a college. And they start off basically saying that first, coronavirus canceled spring break. Then it canceled graduation. Will the college decision process be next? And so they talked about 7 or 8 things that are happening right now. So I'm going to throw each one out and we're going to discuss them, Mark.
Hey, Dave, before you do you want to talk about how this was not just someone's opinion, but it was based off of a couple surveys? And you want to
absolutely
about the research behind it?
Well, okay. Well, that's your number 3. So bottom line is these were based on a couple of surveys. So we're going to talk about the first one. The first was the Strata Education Network. And it did a survey and it found that 11% of students are canceling their education plans. So you want to start with that point, Mark?
Yeah. And one of the things it was interesting, this was a poll of over 5,000 people.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty significant number of people they looked at. And not only are they looking at canceling their plans, these are canceling their plans to attend school in the fall, but something we've talked about before, before COVID-19 broke out, many times we've talked about how higher ed is under assault. And it's under assault because of a confluence of about 5 different factors. And this is so important that I'm just going to restate them. For those of you listening regularly, I know you've heard this before. One is the diminished international enrollment, which was already happening for the last several years. A lot of it has to do with the Trump administration's posture on international students and therefore them not feeling like the U.S. is friendly turf.
Yep.
Other factors play a role there as well, including other countries recognizing that opportunity and really stepping up their outreach and their offerings. So you had a demise in international recruitment. You have what Rick Clark from Georgia Tech calls the birth dearth, meaning that, and Nathan McGraw, we talked about that before, the educator out of Carleton College, that there's diminished births by 2025. And every person in college admissions knows that. You can just look at the charts and you see how many kids are coming up through the grades. You can look 2025 is going to be a lot less people for all of these schools.
Yeah.
So you have that. You have the high cost of college, making it unaffordable for a lot of people. You have the diminished perception by young people that education is something of value, going down from the 73% feeling higher education is of value not that long ago, down to 41%. Not worth it really. And then you have the growth of alternative programs that are on the rise, such as badges, such as certificates, such as online education, all of these things. And so this article particularly talked about other kids are looking at certificate programs, it says, or courses related to in-demand jobs instead of traditional degrees. Anything else you want to say, Dave, or do you want to go into one of your other points?
No, I think you did a great summary of at least 3 or 4 college different podcasts that we've had. I want to really emphasize the way that the international student market is really, really, really impacting colleges. And I was reading a related article that the United States is not realizing it, just a time that we're starting to turn our backs on a lot of the international market. Many schools in India and China and Canada and Europe are increasing their appeal to international students. In fact, many companies like Microsoft and Google are actually directly recruiting from these top technical colleges in China, in India. So it may come a day when we reopen up the doors to international students and find that we've missed the boat. We've given away the market because kids are in Canada saying,
And Australia's been effective. New Zealand's been effective.
That's right.
And the thing that I think that we should emphasize here, something I said maybe last week or the week before, but the average private U.S. school has a tuition discount rate of 52%.
Right.
And basically tuition discount rate is just take a look at the cost of attendance, take a look at the tuition that's listed when you go on a website. Yeah. And then, but what percentage of that do students actually pay? Yeah. So take 52% off of that. That's what students actually pay on average. And that's a combination of merit and need-based aid. So when a school is looking at a budget, they're looking at their tuition, private schools in particular that have higher tuition discount rates because they work more off of a model of higher sticker price, higher discount rate. So they're looking at getting half of that. Yep. But with the international population, that constituency is paying full price with fees.
You've pointed out before that solid flagship schools like University of Illinois at Urbana, in the absence of having those international students, are going to have to significantly raise the tuition on their in-state students to cover. So we've talked about it before,
but they're also really drawn to flagship schools.
Yes.
So flagships like Illinois and Indiana have been taking large numbers of students from mostly China and India.
Right. Okay. So let's hit on another part with the article.
Yes, let's do.
Okay.
Because I'll get off.
No problem.
So Nico be slapping me. Not on one cheek, but both cheeks.
That's right. We're on the clock. The draft.
And I'm recording with her today too. So her conscience is loud in my voice, in my ear.
All right. Round 2, the Arts and Science Group survey, which is a group that we've talked about in the past in other podcasts.
Yeah, because they came out, what they're actually doing is they're doing like a survey. Yeah. They're doing these COVID surveys with students pretty much every month.
Yeah.
To test the waters, to see how it's changing perceptions of college amongst seniors.
Yeah.
And so they're doing Arts and Science Group. They're doing a series of these.
Right.
And so what happened is they just released their most recent one that just came out May 1st. So it has new data. You want to share some of that, Dave?
Yes. It says 40% of students that have been accepted have yet to submit a deposit, and 12% of those who put down a deposit have now changed their minds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really speaks to the uncertainty.
Yeah.
It really, really, really speaks to the uncertainty. And our article goes on to say, and I'll read this, major reasons for students' uncertainty about college. About half say their family members' employment status has changed.
Right.
As a result of the pandemic, according to Art and Science Group survey.
Yeah.
The recently released NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll also found that 50% of Americans had personally been financially impacted.
Yeah.
So now you've got 2 major surveys showing that 50% of parents have had their finances impacted. And I've shared this before in this podcast. Anecdotally, Dave, I've had a number of families I work with who have shared that their financial situation is completely different as a result of this. And therefore, they want to tweak the college list because with everybody I work with, I always find out what's their price point, what's the maximum amount they're willing and able to pay.
Right.
And then we build a strategy based on that. How much do you expect the student to pay? How much are you going to pay? Do you believe in student loans, not loans, student working? Do you have savings? Like, what's the strategy? What's the plan? And then I find colleges for them within their budget. Right. So they've had to come back to me and say, in some cases it's been drastic. In some cases, it's family that was said, look, we can pay the full freight at any school. And now they're saying to me, like, we need to be looking in more of the $30,000, $35,000 range.
That's
so
correct.
I personally have experienced this a lot just with my clients.
Yeah, and I'd like to make a point that in this particular survey, they actually said that the kids who have yet to make a deposit, they tend to be under more economic stress. They tend to be kids with lower SAT, ACT scores, lower socioeconomic status, first-year generational students. However, you and I both know, Mark, that there are many, many professionals, people making solid six figures, mid six figures, who still have multiple kids in the pipeline. Maybe they have 2, 3, 4 kids in private school in paying 30, 40 grand. And now they have to not just consider one kid going to school, but maybe 3 or 4 kids. And so the difference between paying $50,000 and $80,000 over the course of 4 years is $100,000, $120,000 per child. And you multiply that by 3 or 4. Well, that's a good sized retirement plan for an average family. So these are issues that are not just affecting people of lower socioeconomic status. It's affecting all but the very wealthy. So,
yeah, I think that one of the biggest differences is with more affluent families. A lot of this is me anecdotal here. There's still a plan to go to college,
right?
Either they're having conversations, gap semester, gap year, or they're going to go to college, but they've maybe changed their price point, their sticker point of what they're willing to pay. Yep. With more non-traditional students, first gen, they're the ones that are more likely to say, bump it. Like, I'm going to look for a job, or I'm going to do a real short, an online program, stay home and just do an online program, or do a certificate or do a badge. I think that's one of the differences. And another major thing that they found in that study, that particular survey you mentioned, Dave, is, and they quote a student here named Collie. And actually, I'll say, was that one of your additional points, or was that under this point?
No, that was a highlight. I thought you'd hit it, so you are. That's
okay. Yeah, so they highlight the student, Jordan Collie. And it goes on to say she knows the reality firsthand. It says, since she was in the 8th grade, Collie had wanted to go to Penn State. She told USA Today she was extremely excited about the alumni network at Penn State, the opportunity to do underground research, and she was accepted at Penn State. Everything, all systems go. And then coronavirus breaks out. Her mom was put on furlough in March and will not be able to return until July. So that significantly reduced the money the family had. And what does it do? It changes her options. So what is called? Collie says, out of state is no longer an option. She lives in Virginia, and she will be going either to Virginia, VCU, Virginia Commonwealth, or the nearby Community College of Northern Virginia Community College. Both of them have in-state tuition options for the Alexandria, Virginia teen. And then she goes on to say, for me to go to college now, I just need to make sure it's affordable. And then she speaks for just so many people in the country.
Well, I can tell you that living in a place that has had an ex-migration for many years, Illinois, I know many doctors who, one of the factors why they go to a North Carolina, why they go to a Georgia, why they go to a Florida, why they go to a Texas, is not only is the cost of living lower, not only in many cases are they making more money, but with multiple kids, they also know that they're going to go to a place that has a solid flagship university system that is markedly less expensive. You've mentioned many times, Mark, about the University of Georgia, its special program that's essentially gives you college for free if you've got a B+ average at the Georgia State College system, and at the top of the ladder of UGA and Georgia Tech are second to none in their strength. So,
and I'll go a step further, Dave.
Yeah.
I was I'm not a doctor, but I was just like those doctors. Mm-hmm. So I was working at the Westtown School in 2009. Everybody, our regular listeners know I am, as Dave calls me, a weather weenie. I do not like cold weather.
Yes, no, you don't.
So I'd had one too many cold Pennsylvania winters. They're not Chicago winters because I lived there for a year. They're not Canada winters. They're not Michigan winters, but they're still too brutal for me.
Yeah, I want to remind people, this is a brother who grew up in Canada, so.
Yeah. You know what? My mom's from Bermuda, and she can't handle the hot, okay? Not at all. So I think it's more about your constitutional makeup than where you grew up. Because even when I was in Canada, I hated the cold as a little kid.
You got the weather weenie gene.
I do. So I said, Anitra, I can't take it. We need to move. And so we figured out, where do we want to live? Well, we like being close to cities, but not in cities. So we figured out it's either going to be Raleigh, Charlotte, or Atlanta. But one of the major reasons why we ended up looking at those places is because they all have incredible options for college. I've been paying private school tuition, even that I got a reduced rate because I worked at a school. And I'm like, I know college will definitely be affordable if we're in these states because of their great flagship schools and their great options, whether it's Georgia Tech, or the UNC system. But anyway, just wanted to say I'm that person. I'm not a doctor, but I'm that guy who moved. And one of the reasons on the list was amazing options at affordable colleges. But this is not a promo for that. So let's keep it moving.
All right.
And actually, before we move on, let's talk about the context.
Yeah.
The bigger context of this article is that COVID-19 has been an earthquake,
right,
from a standpoint of the colleges. And now they are really in a quandary.
Right.
I'll share a little bit of an interview that I heard with Janet Napolitano, who's been the chancellor for the UC system for quite some time. She's stepping down coming up later in 2020, but she's still trying to shepherd them through this crisis now. And take a guess, Dave, how much the UCs lost in the month of March due to this. Take a guess.
Well, I'm basing it on the fact that last week we talked about University of Virginia losing about 125 million. And you got at least 10 colleges of that size and drawing power. So it's got to be over $1 billion.
Well, 600 million, but she said April will be even more.
All right. So
600 million was lost just in the month of March. And she said April's going to be even higher.
So it'll be $1 billion.
Yeah. And you know, one thing, I don't want to get off too much on the tangent on this. Well, actually, I will ask you to answer this because you're, so you not only work in hospitals all the time, you've got went and got another degree from Northwestern in sort of hospital administration.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't realize, and as much until I heard Napolitano speak, is, there are a lot of hospitals that are run by these colleges that bring in revenue.
Absolutely.
And some of that money, and a lot of that money was the loss of hospital revenue that they incur. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the classic cases is the University of Chicago. University of Chicago hospitals has been a huge revenue driver. In fact, it regularly vies with Northwestern in Chicago as being the most profitable and the highest revenue producing hospital network in Chicago. And it's precisely because of that revenue that the University of Chicago was able to finance the bonds for its undergraduate expansion. So when I came to University of Chicago, the undergraduate campus was literally 40% the size as it is now. And all that expansion was driven by those monies. Well, you have to look at any major hospital system and think that it's down at least a third of its revenues fiscal year going forward. And that just means that there's no more money there to actually support, to buffer the other aspects of the institution that was upholding the law schools, the business schools, the undergraduate schools. So there's huge revenue effects going all the way down the chain.
All right, let's keep moving, Dave. How many of the 7 points have we hit?
Oh boy, Anika's gonna. We're in a red.
Well, you know what?
Okay,
we're not doing a college spotlight today, so you and I are going to roll a little bit on this.
All right, no problem. Well, its second point was that we already talked about this, and it said, quote, many colleges desperate for money have rolled back traditional May 1st deadline to June. But they stress that despite that, colleges may not know their class until the first day of class. And that dovetails into another point they made that you talked about extensively as being one of the biggest stories of last year, was that of the NACAC decision.
Yes, I want to talk about this.
That's right. That enrollment, this is a quote, enrollment is a mystery until move-in weekend, partly because of the antitrust ruling earlier this year against NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. And Mark, why don't you take it away and expand on that?
Yeah, so some of you may remember, regular listeners, I was very, very upset about this when it happened. Yeah. So what's happened is in the past, there were established policies and principles by NACAC, National Association of College Admissions Counseling, serves as kind of a governing body for implementing policies and principles of good practice. And they were forced to have to change a longstanding policy by the Department of Justice that was looking at really coming in and enacting some significant consequences unless changes were made. The Department of Justice, and I do not agree one iota with this, but they saw the current system as non-competitive for students and a disadvantage for students. So basically what they had to change was several things. One, when a student makes a deposit and commits to a college, this is the main one I'll focus on for now, you are expected to not continue to recruit that student anymore. They've made a commitment. They're going where they're going. And it was a major ethics violation to continue to go after them after they had already enrolled somewhere else. And now that's all fair game.
That's right.
So we did a podcast in the news.
You called it the Wild Wild West.
Yes, you remember that, Dave. That was right. Before you were on the show. But
that's right.
But I'll tell you this about Dave. Dave listened to every single podcast before he came on, episode 105, I think was his first one. And every single one he gave me feedback on as well, which was great. But yeah, we did an article. It's going to be the Wild Wild West.
Right.
And desperate measures call for desperate times. How's that saying go? I'm getting it wrong. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I think that's it. Desperate times call for desperate measures.
Or was it desperate times call for desperate housewives? Can't remember.
Oh,
no. Sorry. Well, I forget it too.
Take some time to chill.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. I didn't see that one coming. Okay. So when a school is facing massive budget cuts because they're under enrolled, what are they going to do? They're going to reach back out to people that were in their applicant pool and say, hey, you know what I mean? I know we offered you X amount, but how'd you like another 10 or 15 grand? Because at this point, getting almost a little money is better than no money. Sure, you have some food costs and some other costs. You know, you got a staff advising and stuff like that. But I don't want to make this comparison, but I've said, you know, like when you have a golf course, most of your costs are up front. Whether somebody plays on the course or not doesn't add that much cost. That's not quite a fair comparison, but you get the point. Adding another body to your student body costs you money, but not like your fixed costs of salaries and benefits and facilities and infrastructure that are automatically have to be paid.
Yep.
And so some schools can get super aggressive, and now it's just going to be out of control. And everybody, as I talk to different admissions officers, they're afraid of this. Yep. They're afraid, as one really prominent admission director said last week, he said to me, Mark, my fear is that even when people submit a deposit, it's not going to be sticky. It's not going to be sticky. You know, colleges have long, we've talked about this before on the podcast quite a bit, the whole notion of summer melt. Summer melt is people who had made deposits, who had submitted contracts, but they don't show up in the fall. They just melt away. Think of it like a frozen popsicle. just melts away. I mean, like a thawing popsicle. And so now the problem for colleges is they don't even know who's coming, even based on who submitted deposit and who's turned a contract in. One, because as the survey shows, a lot of people's commitments are just tepid. So you've got people delaying their deposits because they're weighing their options. You got people who have made deposit. They said they still may change their mind.
Yeah.
But then throw in the curveball, other colleges coming after you with a better offer and your finances are tight. You know what?
It's going to be brutal.
People can say, you know what? I'll forego my $100 or $200 deposit or $400 or $500 deposit because you're giving me $10,000.
Well, Mark, we're rapidly approaching a zero-sum game for the colleges. Look, the bottom line is, especially after Corona, I'm convinced 25% will not be around. We can put a time frame on that, but I think it's been accelerated.
Yeah, and I think that number may be a bit high. There's we'll have to do another in the news on that. There's some real detailed studies out as to how many may close and where that number came from, and why I think it's likely to be less than that. But I want to quibble about that right now. I think we should take that as another in the news. But the bottom line is a lot of schools are going to either close, merge, or reinvent themselves, meaning downsize, move to a combination of, hybrid, beef up their online. I think the number that will close will not be 25%, but I think there'll be a lot that will reinvent themselves. But anyway, the point is still the same.
Yeah. So you're saying more like 10%, 15%, or you're not quite
the biggest people that I know that follow this the closest, I think we're looking at 6 to 8% on the high side of actual closures.
Okay.
But that's still a lot of schools.
Right.
Okay. Because if you look at how many schools actually close every year, 4-year close of the 2,300 not-for-profit schools every year, not that many close every year. It's a big deal when they do. Right. It becomes a big story. Yeah. But if you're talking about, take the high side. If it's 8% of that, that's 200.
Right.
But I think what you're going to see is a lot of, complete rearranging their whole structure. Like George Washington didn't necessarily do this because of financial problems, but they're downsizing.
Right.
So I think you're going to see downsizing, and you're going to see a lot more just shifting. You're already seeing it, shifting, combining hybrid. Hybrid is a combination of online with in person.
Right.
And you're also seeing it in other ways in which they're restructuring, meaning becoming a lot more career-based with what they offer. Schools are doing really unique things now, like putting people through automatically tagging certificate programs on to the end that completely give students exposure and, in the job world. Colleges, we're already seeing this, offering a lot more certificate programs. It's way more certificate programs now and badges that are offered by the colleges. Before, those were not offered by the mainline colleges, and then the colleges have adopted them. You can come in and do a really short stint and get some certification skills. I think what's going to be in trouble over time, Dave, the 4-year residential as a percentage of students that end up doing it. There's always going to be people that'll do it, but there's just other people using other approaches to get their education. But anyway, we're going off on a tangent, Dave.
Well, I'm going to go these last 3 or 4 points quickly, and then we're going to discuss them. Okay. So they made the point that if classes go online, students are going to expect to pay less. They made the point that colleges may have to do a combination of lower tuition and or increase the financial aid. They pointed out that Davidson was deferring fall semester payment to July of next year, and that Lee College was actually waiving tuition for in-state high schoolers and for returning students. And they also pointed out in all of this how difficult it is for students to choose a college sight unseen in the midst of all this uncertainty and how that's going to affect it. And lastly, it talked about that right now you're seeing uniformity in schools' approaches, but do expect to see some differentiation on the approaches that schools are going to take. such as Purdue that says we're going to open up as normal, to San Jose State that says that we are going to continue online, to places like Benoit that's going to do the block system that you talked about, which is shortening the courses into smaller blocks so that if they have to make adjustments, at least the students have done a cycle in their studies and it's not as disruptive.
One I want to comment on was the first one. Dave knows this. We went back and forth on what was going to be in the news this week. Yep. And one of the articles we'd read, we talked about, we were prepared to come on and talk about, were the protests that are breaking out all over the country, actually. The article focused on the one on the University of Chicago.
Right.
But they've broken out on at least 6 or 8 other campuses that I'm aware of. And I'm sure there's plenty more that I'm not aware of. And, initially the protests started over room and board. Why? How can you charge me room and board when I'm not at home for students that had to leave in the middle of the year? Now it's gone in the direction of how can you charge me full price for tuition when I'm getting an online education or a remote education?
That's right.
And colleges are feeling that pressure because the real answer they have is we can't give you back the money because we need that money to pay our bills and to pay our staff and faculty and benefits.
Yeah.
Nobody in good conscience would ever say what you're getting now is the exact same thing that you would get if you were here. And nobody would say that you don't have a legitimate point. But they just can't have it because they can't give it because they don't have it, or they also don't want to establish that precedent.
Right.
But look at the creative things are doing. You mentioned Davidson. Actually, I think it's brilliant for Davidson to do that. It was very smart. Basically, Davidson is saying, we know you might have been hit hard in the pocket. So guess what? We will delay you paying your tuition until July of 2020. And one thing they also did that was smart, they announced that before May 1st. So you're someone and you're trying to decide, you're looking at Davidson versus Haverford or Williams or Swarthmore or Vanderbilt or UVA or Wake Forest or UNC, Chapel Hill. Those are a lot of Davidson's overlaps. Washington and Lee. Wow, my funds are a little tight right now. I don't have to pay for a year. It was kind of a brilliant move.
Yeah, but I didn't see that.
They have almost $1 billion endowment for a very small school. So they're able to do that. Very few schools could literally say, don't pay your bill for a year and still keep, have the money to pay everybody. So it's not something that I think will have widespread replication. You're going to say something, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, it still means that next year you're going to have to double up on your payments. So I didn't see this being a huge, it's sort of like, okay, you can defer your mortgage for a year, but next year your payments go to $2,000 a month. So, unless if your situation in your job does not radically improve, like I got hired back and I got a raise, well, you could be having some issues next year. So
no, that's not going to be easy. But if you think about how a consumer thinks,
right?
If you just get punched in the mouth and things are really tight right now, for you to have a reprieve for a few months and then have time to get your finance, I just think it's going to be very effective at getting people to enroll. I think it was, as I put my admissions hat on, I think that was actually a really smart move if you can afford to do it. Well, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be easy, though. You're not saying you're getting a discount. You're still paying full price.
And the Mike Tyson analogy, I'm not going to give you my uppercut now, but the right hook is coming.
So I think Mike Tyson has replaced the Tesla as the main analogy.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about last week.
Our truculent philosopher.
Yes, we talked about our truculent philosopher who has one of the all-time favorite quotes, which Dave and I love. Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the mouth.
That's right.
And then, and you'll hear people quote it. It applies to everything from politics to education.
That's right.
So, well said. Any final comments, Dave?
No, I think that it was pretty exhaustive. And I think we hit the time limit, but, just from my own, thoughts, I know that Lauren and I have not heard back from Yale yet. I think she is leaning to going back to school. I have my own opinions, but she's the ultimate arbiter. But until we get a final lay of the land, I have not committed to actually signing up for another year. So I totally understand where most parents are coming from on this issue.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's happening with a lot of students with that. As much as we love our kids, Dave, and they love us, they'd rather be with people their age. And, we have to think back when we were their age. We were the same way. And so as much as they love us, they're really yearning to be back with peers. And so what I'm experiencing in my counseling load is a lot of parents saying, I don't want to pay this for inferior education. And a lot of students saying, even if it's going to be different, I want to go back because I'm yearning to be back with my peers. So I think the tug of war you're experiencing in your household is very, very, very similar to what I'm hearing from so many of the different families that I'm working with. And we'll see who wins that tug of war. In some cases, one family, in some cases, another. And a lot of cases, it's going to depend on what the colleges say. Now, I'll say one last thing on this. Another article Dave and I read, prepped for, we were ready to go. We had 3 we were ready to go on this week. And thank Dave for being so flexible. But Brown University president came out with a big article, and there was a lot of buzz in it all over the news. She was on lots of the news shows talking about it. And it basically said why colleges have to go back and what concessions they're looking at making to make it safe. But when a leading college like Brown basically comes right out and says, we don't have a choice, we will be going back in some capacity, you can best believe that 98% of other colleges in the country will say, if Brown's going back, we're going to have to find a way to make this work with whatever concessions we have to do. And so
I agree.
I'm going to be more surprised than ever if a sizable number of schools are still not having some residential situation in the fall. I just think everything is really pointing in that direction, unless there's some massive outbreak between now and then. And I think that's probably unlikely, Dave, don't you think? Because if anything, flu season hits harder in the fall after these decisions would be made.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that we've made some tentative progress through some antivirals. We're showing that the mortality rate of the virus is considerably lower than we initially thought. And there's a national imperative to get back to normal before we turn this recession into a depression. So for all those reasons, I agree with you. So
yeah, there was another article that came out this week about how closing down colleges is turning some towns into complete ghost towns.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much pressure. But let's move on.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Anika Madden, you were MIA this week, missing in action. I couldn't get a text return. I was about to call Javon, Janaea, everybody, and put out an all-points bulletin. What was going on with your week?
It's crazy. I mean, you just got to stay focused. I mean, being clumped up in the house like this is so easy to get off track. And when you get off track, it is not a pretty picture. So like keeping the kids on the schedule and me really, because technically I'm working, like I'm supposed to be working from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or whatever.
Right.
So like the kids are complaining, you're always working. I'm like, because I have a job.
Yeah, you are. Your kids are right.
Yeah, but they don't realize, they get these little breaks, but I'm like, okay, people, we're still like, we have to be in work mode. So
I know.
It's been a challenge. It's just been a challenge to stay in serious work mode. Like when I get into a project, I really got to like shut myself off because so many distractions.
Yeah. So what do you do? Throw your phone in the cupboard or something? When you're there?
Pretty much. Yeah.
I was literally starting to wonder if are you in the hospital or something?
No, I would have alerted you. I'm out of commission. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, because I'm one of these people, I acknowledge any text I get because that's the only way that I can know that somebody got the message. And if someone doesn't respond, I don't know if they got it or not.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Dave goes AWOL on me like that sometimes too.
Yeah,
I'm like, yo, Dave, I've sent you 4 texts. Are you getting my messages?
You a 24/7 working machine anyway, Mark. That's just your natural nature.
I know. I have some workaholism in me. You know what? When the kids were at home, it was different though, because I was running around with all their AAU stuff and going to parent-teacher conferences and all that. But now that they're gone and I'm empty nest syndrome, all that time I was doing all those extracurriculars and all that stuff is just thrown into work mode.
See, yeah. Not an empty nester yet.
Yeah.
It's all good though.
All right, let's transition. So we are looking at Chapter 119 in a book I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And the name of the chapter today is What is FSEOG and How Can I Get It? Anika, you read the chapter. What were your takeaways?
Well, let's just call it out. It is the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. I did not memorize that. I am reading that. So,
well, it's an acronym. You're right.
It is
a lot of times people just call it SEOG because at least you don't have to say federal. Makes it a little easier. So you'll see it listed as SEOG or FSEOG.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, you'll see it both ways.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a grant, meaning these are monies that do not have to be repaid. We love those. We know that you have to complete the student has to complete the FAFSA in order to be eligible.
Correct.
And the range of the award, is between $100,000 and $4,000. And you also state that the average is well under $1,000. So
Correct.
Can we pause right there for a second? Because I have a question about that. So I'm assuming, it's based on income, but I just wonder, is the household income $50,000, so you're guaranteed a $4,000, or if it's
no.
How does that work?
Not at all. So first of all, FSEOG is for the most under-resourced families. If you're not Pell eligible, you're not FSEOG eligible. But just because you're Pell eligible does not mean you're FSEOG eligible. It's for the most needy Pell families. There are a lot of schools that only give an FSEOG grant to students that have a 0 EFC. By the way, I made a mistake last week. I didn't catch when I was editing. So normally I catch this stuff, but I said, it made no sense. I said, if you have a $25,000 EFC, then you have the automatic 0 EFC. And what I meant to say was, if your AGI is 25,000 or less, then you have a automatic 0 EFC.
And wait, AGI, annual gross income?
Adjusted gross income.
Adjusted gross income. Okay.
I can't remember. It's either line 37 or 38 on your 1040 tax returns. There are a lot of schools that only give FSEOG to students with the 0 EFC. And not every college participates in FSEOG.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Not every college does, because what happens with FSEOG is the federal government is paying $3 and the school's paying $1. So even that it is a federal program from the federal government, the college is kicking in some money, 25% to the government, 75%.
I mean, and clearly that's the reason why not all schools participate, because they just may not have the funds to do that.
There's a lot of reasons. There's a complex formula that Department of Education uses to determine who gets, the FSEOG funding. I don't fully understand all the nuances of the formula, but the bottom line is, if you are somebody as an applicant who is very under-resourced and likely not only to qualify for Pell, we talked about Pell last week, being for students that have an EFC 5711 or under. And, if you're on the lower end of that, then it's worth inquiring with your school. Are you a partner, an FSEOG school? And by the way, I spent a couple hours, Anika, trying to find a list of every single school that participates in the FSEOG program.
I was going to ask you that, because I was going to say, I'm sure you can probably go to the college's website, like their financial aid section, to see if they participate. But I was going to ask you if there's like a repository of a list of something.
There's too many websites to go to.
Right. Exactly. So there is no repository, I guess.
So I was looking for a master list. So if any of our astute listeners out there have a list of every FSEOG school, please send that link because I could not find that.
That's interesting.
But if you can check with your colleges, if you are a student or if you're a college counselor and you work with some of the students that are highly under-resourced,
mm-hmm.
It is a good thing to find out. One, are the schools on the list partners with the FSEOG program? Secondly, what is the range of their gifts? Because you know how you said, is everybody guaranteed to get the $4,000?
Well, at a certain amount, at a certain household
No. So
income.
Guess what?
Yeah.
So some schools, Anika, the max award they give is $1,000.
Okay.
Every school gets to determine their own policies. Are we going to, in terms of how they divvy up that money?
Right.
But if you're someone that qualifies for the full Pell 6345 and you qualify for the full FSEOG $4,000, that's an extra $10,345 of free money that you don't have to repay. So what other questions did you have about FSEOG, or what other takeaways did you have from the chapter?
Well, I think the most important part on this one is that it's first come, first serve, basically, for the schools that are participating. Like, okay, you hurry up and finish that FAFSA, what is it, October 1 that it comes out, and then, go for broke after that.
Yeah, so what I would say is this. Every school determines their own policy. They determine how much they're going to give. They determine what your EFC has to be to qualify for certain thresholds. And of course, each school has a different amount of FSEOG money too. And then each school will determine its own policy, but a very, very common policy on the part of schools is first come, first serve. So as a applicant, if you don't know, it's just better to better safe than sorry. Now here's the other thing. You don't explicitly apply for an FSEOG grant.
Oh.
So let's say you've never even heard of FSEOG, right? And you complete your FAFSA and you are not only Pell eligible, but you're one of the needier Pell eligible students that that school receives, whether it's a 0 EFC or maybe their policy allows you to go up to 1,500 EFC. And you apply and you have that, and you've never ever heard of FSEOG. Then once you complete the FAFSA and you get your aid award, it can say FSEOG grant on there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's just basically not a separate application for it.
Yeah. So submitting the FAFSA is the way that you apply for FSEOG. Same for Pell. Same for something we'll be talking about a little bit later, coming up in the next couple months. Federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized and Parent Plus loan. All of those things. All those are federal programs, grants and loans. Completing the FAFSA triggers all of that stuff.
Okay.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
All right. Well, I guess we are FSEOG done.
Well, I had a couple other comments I wanted to make, about FSEOG. One is, the same basic things that apply to all financial aid do apply, meaning that you need to be a United States citizen or an eligible non-citizen, which is usually a permanent resident. although there are a couple other exceptions. You can't be in default on any past federal loan. This is something that you can't already have a bachelor's degree for people that, do not have a bachelor's degree already. And so
that's a good one.
There are a few other things as well. The FSEOG money, it normally will be dispersed directly to the college to be used for the billable expenses, tuition, student fees, and if you're on campus, room and board. But it also can be dispersed directly to you in the form of a check as well. You meaning the student.
All right.
Let's say you already have enough money to cover tuition, room and board. It can be used for your non-billable things like books and supplies, transportation, personal miscellaneous, the things that you don't spend, that you don't give to the school. Yeah, and Anika, FSG, it's a tongue twister, Anika. It's a tongue twister. You know what? You're Miss Nickname. Can you give this a nickname for me?
Not this one, sorry.
Not this one? Okay. Well, if you think about that later, let me know, because I'm struggling over here. Goodness. I'm struggling. Mighty struggling.
Just say that one. Well, we know
that
what we're talking
one.
about.
Okay. We'll call it that one for now. Yeah, Anika, and one other thing is that the funds have to be paid out at least once a term. That's a requirement.
Wait,
and I mean, paid out from I'm talking about paid out from the school to the student. So if the school's on the quarter system, then they have to pay them out quarterly. If they're on the semester system or the trimester system, then they absolutely have to do that. And that's just one of the requirements. So what's the bottom line? So based on everything I've said, what would be your advice to someone who's wondering, am I going to be eligible for FSEOG? And if so, how much?
Yeah, I mean, just remembering the point that it's exclusively for low-income families. Mm-hmm. Really getting in and doing that fast. And like you said, we don't know where that list is yet of schools that participate. But and I'm keep wondering about that. It's like, doesn't the Department of Education, somebody's got to be tracking it somewhere to have a list available. But so that FAFSA is key, getting it done. Knowing that, it doesn't have anything. If you're a moderate income, then don't even think about it. And limited availability.
So this would be the other thing I'd add to that. I agree with all those things. If you have a list of schools and you're kind of wondering, whether to apply to school A, school B, school C, and you are that under-resourced family, like your funds are really, really tight. It's absolutely worth checking with the financial aid office. Do they participate in the FSEOG grant? I got it right that time. I didn't have to say that one. See, now that you gave me a moniker for it, now I don't need it anymore.
See,
it's worth checking with them. It's worth finding out what their scale is based on. It is going to be synced to EFC. I can tell you that they will use the EFC number for their. Because you really can't use income, because with income, it depends how many dependents you have and assets and things, right? So EFC is a better gauge because it takes income and assets and family size into consideration, number of kids at college, all that's factored into EFC. So they're going to use EFC, not like income. So find out what income thresholds are, find out what the maximum amounts are. And the reason why I say that, if you're an under-resourced family and one school is offering FSEOG, and you may be eligible for $4,000, and another school you're looking at isn't offering at all, that's significant. That can make the difference between whether you apply or not apply to that school. And if you're a commuter student, that could be the difference between you not having any expenses at all. Pell and FSEOG could cover 100% of your expenses. So $3,000 or $4,000. It can, that could be a substantial amount of money. So that's my last point, is check with your schools if you feel you fit the income criteria.
All right.
I'm FSA. See, I was just thinking I had it down. I'm that one burned out.
There you go.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark. This week's question is from Micky in Massachusetts. Mickey's a student. He says, I'm a junior from Wellesley. I can never say this one. Wellesley, Massachusetts. Did I say that right?
Yep. Wellesley. It's a affluent suburb just outside of Boston where Wellesley College is, and Dana Hall boarding school. I got multiple kids there.
All right. Well, Micky is a junior from Wellesley, and he would like, or she would like to know.
It's a she.
It is a she. Okay. She would like to know, when should I start writing my personal statements?
And the answer is now. That's an easy one.
Okay.
If you have the time now. Now let's just backtrack. First of all, there's a lot of different applications we know that are out there when it comes to applying to college. And I never like to assume anything, but in the state of Massachusetts, at least, the flagship school, UMass Amherst, they do not take the coalition. Okay, so she's in Massachusetts, so I'm assuming she's probably not referring to the coalition, although I will say something about the coalition in a second. I doubt she's referring to the UC app for California or the Apply Texas, which is the Texas app, or the Black Common app. So I just want to acknowledge there are a lot of different general apps out there. Black Common app, Apply Texas, UC app, Coalition, and Common app are the most common 5. So she's probably referring to Common App because Massachusetts is a big Common App state, and that's the largest one. The personal statement is your main essay that is required for the Common Application and the coalition. Okay, there's one main essay that goes to every school that participates rather than you having to do one big long essay for each individual school. Each individual school might have some additional college-specific essays. In some cases, I've seen them be 600. I've even seen one be 700 words. So the Common App main essay gives you 7 prompts. It's a maximum of 650 words. The coalition gives you 5 prompts, and they suggest not going over 500 to 550 words. The Common App is strict. It'll cut you off if you go 651. And it's your main essay. So you have these 7 prompts on the Common App. You have these 5 prompts on the coalition. And they've been out for a while. Like the Common App, they came out, I'm talking about for the 2021 class, the current juniors.
Mm-hmm.
They came out with their 7 prompts. It was either the last week of January or the first week of February. They had them out so students could start working on them. And the coalition's been out for a while too. Now, because there are many schools like UMass Amherst that are Common App only and a few schools that are coalition only, one thing you can do to be strategic is to look at the coalition prompts, look at the Common App prompts, and pick a topic that's good for both. And you can do that. For example, they both have write on any topic of your choice prompt. That's an option. And they both have a name a time when you challenged a particular belief prompt along those lines. So one astute thing to do is to pick a prompt that will work for either coalition or Common App. And what you could do is make your essay 550 words, and then you've fulfilled the requirements for both of them. But I've been working with students on their personal statements now since certainly since late February. And, it's a great time to get started. Now, I always tell students this, your grades come first. Right. And so a lot of the students I'm working with right now, Nika, they're in the middle of AP exams, heavy AP exams. It's AP exam time now through Memorial Day. And so, I'm not saying that like jettison that, like your grades are going to be so important, especially grade spring semester of junior year. So, but if time allows, start working away a little bit on it at a time, because what I like to do with all of my juniors is by the time they start the senior year, I like them to have their college list nailed down, their test scores done, their personal statement done. That's multiple drafts. You're going to have to do multiple drafts to get this thing really, where it's your absolute best work.
Yeah. And
then even the ones that are really advanced, I like for them to do all the sections of the Common App. There's 7 sections. There's only 2 sections you can't do before August 1st. I like them to have all 5 of those sections completed. And then for some students, we even do the have them do the call specific questions. I realize that they can change up through August 1st, but most of the time they don't change. So what are you thinking over there, Nick? I've been talking for a while, doing a monologue over here.
Because that's what we want.
Oh, we
that's
don't.
What we want to hear.
We want the lady last week that said there's some good weeds. There's good weeds, and had me cracking up all week on the good weeds line.
No, I mean,
no,
I think to your point about grades come first. It's all about pacing yourself. We're not saying write the whole thing in one day. You can start your brainstorming one day or 1 week and start your, draft the next week. And, it's all kinds of strategies out there to get her done, including, having someone take a look at it and, just giving feedback and all that good stuff. So like you said, start it now, Mickey.
I have a whole series of exercises I do with my students to bring out what's really in them. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of personal reflection. Like they gotta, this is different kind of writing. Some people struggle with this because they're so used to doing, expository writing, argumentative writing, poetry, different types of writing. They've never really done this type of personal reflective writing. And some people really have a hard time with it. And so I use a series of exercises. I went over it with 2 students yesterday to bring out what's really in them. And it's a self-discovery inductive process where they kind of come to the conclusion what they should write on. But I'll say one tip. This isn't about tips for the personal statement. I know we did a bunch of sessions on the personal statement. Like I remember we went a good 5-6 weeks in a row talking about the personal statement and having guests come on talk about it. And toward the end of year 1, maybe it was like the start of year 2 for us. We did that. But I'm going to give one tip right here on this topic. And this is one of my favorite tips for the personal statement. The topic that you are most excited to write about is the topic that readers will be most excited to read about. So I want to repeat that. The topic talking to students now, are most excited to write about is the topic readers will be most excited to read about. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So are you saying that we have to be excited about every topic or just, most is relative? If I see one good and then
it can be relative because everybody's different. And for some people, they're not just going to be excited about anything.
Right.
But it should, if you look at a series of options, there's usually one I find that I kind of want to get this. There's a lot inside me here I want to get out. You know what? I can't help myself, and Nick, you know how I am. I got to give another couple other tips.
Good for you, Mickey.
So colleges are looking for your authentic voice. They want it to be you, and they want to learn something about you they could not find out any other place in the application, not by recommendations.
That's always a tough one. Janaea went through that. I remember Jalen going through that. It's like, what else am I supposed to talk about? And that is really a task, I tell you.
We're going to disagree a little bit on that. I think that maybe the student feels that way, but there's a lot that hasn't been discussed. Now, I know it would be probably more helpful if the student could see the recommendations, because they could say, oh, okay, now I know what the teachers didn't say, so maybe I could go over here. If you look at the prompts, they prompt you into some real personal reflection. And, talk about what gets you excited, what you care about. But do it in a way that has not been expressed in the application in other places. It's tricky, though, because you want to do it through the power of story. You can, there's a lot of approaches. I don't want to get all off because now I'm going to feel like I'm going all off and all the different things you can do in the personal statement. And that's not what we're tasked to do. Any comments, questions, thoughts, Anika?
No. Good luck with that, Mickey. Let us know how it goes.
Good luck, Mickey. Crush it. Vince Garcia. If you haven't heard my interview with Vince Garcia, you really need to hear it. Vince is a guy that has done admissions at 3 different colleges, all in California. But he's also been an admissions reader for both UC Berkeley and UCLA. In fact, I'll tell you this. So I've said before I'm going to be interviewing UCLA's admissions director. That's thanks to Vince. Vince reached out to Mr. Clark at UCLA, and he said, you got to go on this podcast. I love it. I listen to it all the time. And he hooked me up. And then we met together in person in Washington, D.C. and worked out some of the details. But that's thanks to Vince. So he's got a lot of experience, and now he's flipped over to the placement side, and he's breaking down the CSU system. And so today in part 3, Vince and I discuss how grade point averages are calculated at CSU schools. Vince talks about the CSU eligibility calculator. I ask Vince if you are able to predict CSU decisions in advance. I ask Vince if colleges admit into the university as a whole or into a school or a college, or if they admit by major. And Vince answers that. I ask Vince to explain impacted colleges and programs in case anyone missed our last segment, Vince. And I ask what a student can do to get into an impacted program when you are already in the college. Finally, Vince gives some tips for transfer students who want to attend a CSU school. And I ask Vince how out-of-state status impacts the admission process at the California State University schools. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So let's talk a little bit about, admission process a little bit more. We've already said how, we're not looking at essays, we're not looking at recommendations, we're not looking at ninth grade or 12th grade, and extracurriculars, not really at all there either. But the grade point average, of course, is very, very important, and it's a lot what I would almost call a numerical evaluation, right? So, but let's talk about how grade point average is calculated within the CSU system.
Sure.
Is there a GPA that makes a student sort of automatically qualified for admission?
Yes. For students in California, is if you have a through G GPA, and A through G are courses that are mandated by the state of California, both for the University of California and for CSU, for students to take. So English, math, language, science, electives, and the visual or performing arts, 1 year of that, are all part of the A through G course requirements. The nice thing about A through G is that they typically look to come up with your GPA. They look at 10th and 11th grade, and there's a great, if you type in CSU eligibility index and GPA calculator, that will help students and families calculate what their CSU GPA is. The students who are applying from out of state, because I know you have a lot of out of state listeners, it's going to be different because in California, they only give honors credit, even though the class may be called English honors. They only give credit and the GPA boost, 0.5 boost, to junior level or senior level courses. So, and the CSU and the UC system limits the number of AP and honors classes that they'll give credit to. So the CSU and the UC limit is typically 8 AP and honors points that you can get for your GPA. So they calculate based on 10th and 11th grade A through G courses. They look at your testing, and if you're applying to the CSU system, all students who have a 3.0 or above in A through G courses in 10th and 11th grade are eligible to apply to the CSU system. If your GPA is below 3.0 with A through G courses, then they tie an ACT or SAT. So if you're at 2.95, the bar is very low. You could have 800 on the SAT and be able to apply to many of the CSU system. But the lower the GPA is, the higher the SAT and ACT needs to be. So if you have a 2.2 in 10th and 11th grade, you've got to really hit a home run on those tests in order to be eligible to apply.
So do you find you pretty much can predict CSU decisions in advance?
That's with the exception of, I would say, the 6 that are the most selective. So San Luis Obispo, San Diego, Long Beach, Fullerton, Bakersfield. I would say it it's pretty easy to predict whether or not they're going to get in. But after that, you pretty much know if they're going to be admitted not only to the school but also to the major that they want. And in those with those 6 campuses where it's harder to get in because every major is impacted, it's harder to sort of assess where a student would get admitted. So if you're applying to San Diego State and you're outside of their local service area, which is pretty much San Diego County, the expectation is that you're probably going to have mostly A's in order to get into the majors and to the programs that you want to get into.
That's awesome. I mean, it's helpful, very, very helpful. And one thing we haven't talked about is actually the admission process from an admit by major standpoint. Are colleges admitting by major? Are they admitting into schools? Are they admitting into the college at large? Does it vary from school to school? Talk a little bit about that for our listeners.
I think that primarily, unless the program is impacted, that they're admitting students into the major. So if the school is not impacted, again, those 6 universities, San Luis Obispo, Fresno State, Fullerton, Long Beach, San Diego State, and San Jose State, they're not going to admit into the major until you fulfill the requirements, and then you have to maintain a certain GPA or grade level in those classes. So for the other campuses, they'll absolutely admit you into the major. And then those 6, they'll wait and see how you perform if you decide to attend.
Why don't you actually go over impacted campuses, impacted programs one more time, Vince? It's a very commonly understood term anytime I work with anybody from California. But outside of California, it's almost foreign and Greek. So I know you shed light on it a little while ago, but I still think it might have gone over some people's heads.
Sure. So impacted majors in California and in the CSU system would be majors that people would expect to be highly sought after. So courses in biology, nursing, engineering, computer science, anything, psychology, communications, those are all primarily going to be impacted. And the CSU system does a great job when you're looking for degrees at telling you whether or not the particular program you're interested in is impacted. One of the things that transfer students should note if they're listening to the podcast is that one of the biggest ways that you can get into a CSU as a transfer is by completing the courses that they indicate, and they make it very clear, but a lot of students don't go to assist.org and look at the classes that they're expected to take in order to enroll in communication. So you might have, a 3.98, but if you didn't take the classes that they're expecting a communications major to have, especially because that's an impacted program, you're less likely to get in than somebody who may have a 3.6, but they fulfilled all the courses, because the goal, people have to remember, the goal is for these students to graduate. So if you haven't taken the classes, they may not admit you because you're not going to make steady progress and be out in 2 years or whatever it is.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 119 is the Gap Year Research Consortium at Colorado College. Think of this resource as your library when it comes to understanding gap years. You'll find things like a list of the most prominent gap year related organizations and resources. You'll find information about the gap year fairs that travel to 40 different states. You will find information about a number of gap year policies that various colleges have. You'll also be able to read the results of the 2 major studies that looked at what the academic outcomes are when a student takes a gap year. I'm referring to the Middlebury College study in 2012 and the UNC Chapel Hill study a few years later. One of my favorite things about this Gap Year Research Consortium at Colorado College is a section where they have links to more than 10 articles that have been written about gap years. If you are gap semester or gap year curious, this is my absolute favorite resource, and I can't recommend it highly enough. We will leave the link in the show notes. We will now return to my interview with Vincent Garcia, who is helping us to understand the 23 different colleges in the California State University system.
So let's say that let's say a school's impacted, let's just say biology, pick anything. And so let's say a student applies, gets in, not in through biology because it's impacted, but they're enrolled in the school and eventually they want to get into biology. Does how well their GPA is when they're at the college play a role as to whether they're able to eventually get into biology, or is that irrelevant?
Yes.
So talk about that.
It's definitely, I would say that it's not irrelevant, but it's primarily trajectory or courses completed. So if they recommend that you take these 7 classes and you've gotten a B or A and a majority of those. Now, obviously, the student who has more A's than B's is going to be a stronger student when if it came down to, take which one are we going to take. But typically, I would say that it's a combination of things and that they're looking for students who have demonstrated consistent success over a period of time in their community college courses. So the other thing that they're going to look for, for a transfer student is the number of courses that the student has chosen to enroll in. So they're always going to be looking for somebody who's completed a couple of semesters or quarters. That's also another big difference between the CSU and UC. UC campuses are generally on the quarter system. CSU campuses, with the exception of San Luis Obispo, are all moving to the semester system. So students have 15 weeks versus 10 in the quarter system. But if you have completed the courses that they recommend you take before you apply, and generally you have a successful GPA, usually above 3.3 in the more competitive majors, you'll have a much better shot than somebody who has 2 C's and hasn't completed out of the 7 classes required. They've only completed 5. It's going to be hard to get through the door.
And what about out-of-state applicants coming into the CSU system? Do you feel they're at a disadvantage because the state legislature's carving out a certain block of spots explicitly for California residents, or do you find that's a non-factor?
It's definitely a factor, and there has been great pressure from the residents of California to keep the options, because even though there are so many, from community college to 23 CSU options to 8 UC options, and then an abundance of independent schools, they have made it really clear that they don't want their spots going to a lot of people out of state and internationally, even less so. I think that the biggest impact on admissions, and I think a lot of parents and students are unaware of what impact international students have had on college admissions.
Talk about that a little bit more, because that's something that I feel we probably haven't talked about that on the podcast as much as we maybe could have. And I know we haven't talked about it in the context of California schools. So in terms of the impact on international students going to colleges and universities throughout the United States, increasingly, probably after the year 2000, the resources of certain countries and the desire of students coming from Asia, China, South Korea, India, became really abundant, and those students had great testing and grades, and you found
their ability to pay full price were incredible. So also students, I think, from the Middle East, you saw big increases in interest in studying in the United States. And so increasingly, you'd find campuses who were looking to diversify, to have an international, not just, U.S. based student population, and to increase the number of full paying students attending universities and colleges. You've begun to see like large number of campuses begin to shift, and increasingly being pressure put on public universities and even some private universities to limit or put sort of a cap on the number of students coming from outside of the state or coming to the campuses internationally.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that with the UCs, just because I've experienced that either with California students or non-California students. I've seen the pendulum swing to when it was so hard to get in. If it wasn't California, then the financial constraints that California had as a state. And for a while, there was a lot more openness to out of state. And then I know the UC system, have come back and really created some percentage mandates. And,
yes.
There's been huge pushback from the residents that, hey, we're paying all these tax dollars and you're giving our spots away. And so I know they've got sort of like that 25% and 18% at some campuses. I'm not familiar with how that plays itself out with the CSU system and with the community college system.
There probably is less pressure. I remember last year, and this is, just an anecdote rather than, researched information, but I had a student that I was supporting who lived in Oklahoma, and they applied to engineering at San Luis Obispo, which is arguably the most competitive program you could apply to. He could only probably have made it more competitive if he had done computer engineering, but he was admitted, and I was sort of shocked. Not because
did you tell him you were shocked?
No, I mean I did tell him because I just thought he had really strong testing and the grades were all perfect, but I just thought, are they really going to take this out of state student? But one of the reasons that I think he thrived in the processes was they didn't ask for those extra things. They didn't ask about extracurricular activities. They didn't ask for an essay at all. And that's another big difference. In the CSU system, there's no writing, there's no essay, there's no statement. The University of California requires responses to 4 personal insight questions, which
they count quite a bit in the evaluation.
They do. And I tell students to think about those personal insight questions as interviews. This is what you would say if you were sitting in front of the person. This is what they would learn about you. And if you think about them that way, then I think students end up doing a better job.
Next week, we will pick an article once again appropriate for the time. Our book chapter will be, What is the Teach Grant and How Do I Get It? Our bonus content will be how Mark sees COVID affecting the admission process for current juniors. And we will end our interview series with Vincent Garcia, part 4, on understanding the California State University system.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.